Thank you so much. This is Congressman Adriano Espaillat, representing the 13th Congressional District, which encompasses the neighborhoods of Harlem, East Harlem, Washington Heights, Hamilton Heights, Inwood, Marble Hill, and the Northwest Bronx. Thank you all for joining in. I want to particularly thank WEACT for the work that you have been doing year throughout years for environmental causes, not just in Northern Manhattan, but for the entire city and the state of New York, as well as the planet. And I thank you for your commitment to our neighborhoods and the well-being of our families to combat climate change. It is so important as climate change is an existential risk to our communities and our city and state. And our district and our communities contribute the least to climate change, yet are harmed the most. We have high levels of asthma. We have high level of respiratory diseases that are impacting the lives of family members on a yearly basis. And so I am committed to environmental justice and to make sure that when resources are allocated, we get not only our fair share of resources, but that we are addressed first, because we are the ones that contribute the least and are affected the most. And so WEAC has been at the forefront of efforts to accomplish that. While in Congress, I've introduced different pieces of legislation, including the Cecil Corbett Mark Global Environmental Justice Resolution, named after no other than Cecil Corbett Mark, who was a leader and continues to be a source of inspiration for many of us, and was a leader in the environmental justice movement. Also, the Green Climate Fund will see potentially a $1.6 billion allocation this year through the Appropriations Committee, which I now serve in, allocated to the Green Climate Fund. This is so important because environmental issues are not just local. They are hemispheric, they are global in scope. And so we must be able to address some of the environmental issues, for example, that are manifesting themselves in the triangle countries. And as a result, push for the whole migration dynamic to occur in our southern border. And so we must be an active member of the worldwide response to climate change. And that entails putting our money where our mouth is. And so a start of $1.6 billion is a good start. It should be a little bit better than that, but we'll continue to fight for additional resources. And I've also introduced, of course, environmental justice resolution that calls for exactly what I said at the outset of this meeting, which is that communities that are impacted the most by climate change should be given the first opportunity to mitigate those problems and to address them. And that means that in the budget process, we must consider them first in line. And so with that, I want to welcome somebody that has been an ardent supporter of environmental issues. And I also take this opportunity to ask all participants that if you would like to ask a question, please make the comment in our chat so that we could answer your question. But with that, I want to welcome a great friend of the environmental movement and someone who has been representing Northern Manhattan with distinction at the City Council, Councilmember Mark Levine.
Well, thank you so much, Congressmember. It's great to see you and great to have LJ here from WEAC, just such a legendary advocacy group that I'm proud calls West Harlem its home. Congressmember, I want to thank you for fighting for environmental justice in DC, for the initiatives you mentioned, for supporting the Green New Deal, for fighting for an infrastructure package, which in many ways addresses the climate. We really do need federal leadership. We need leadership at the local level as well. This problem is so huge. It's really the challenge of our generation, and we need action at every level This is not hypothetical anymore. Climate change is here. We see it in the wildfires burning in California, which are so bad that smoke and dust have blown all the way across the continent to here on the East Coast. We saw in the horrible floods in Germany and other parts of Europe, where I think hundreds are now dead, the worst they've seen in 1,000 years in that area. And we've seen it right here in Uptown Manhattan just a couple weeks ago with when a bad day of rain led to horrible flooding and shut down our subway system. So this is not a hypothetical. And none of what we are doing is enough. We have got to up our response to this crisis before we hit the point of no return. And you mentioned, Congressmember, some of the important work you're doing at the federal level. We have a lot of work to do at the city level. New York City doesn't have to sit back and wait. We can't. There's a lot we must do. First, to curb our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And the single worst emitter in New York City is actually our large buildings. Some people call them our smokestacks. And so I'm really proud that, in part thanks to advocacy by We Act and many others, in 2019, we passed a bill that puts very strong mandates on large buildings in the city to cut back by 80% the amount of greenhouse gas energy they use, and with stiff fines if they don't comply. That's going to be a long and complicated implementation, and we have to push on that. But, you know, transportation is also an environmental issue and a climate change issue. And when we get people out of cars onto mass transit, buses, subways, or even better on foot and bicycles, that's also a win for the climate. And so we have to do ever more to incentivize people to get out of cars and take more green modes of transportation. And to the extent that people are traveling in cars or the city is using vehicles, we have to push for that to be electrified much more quickly than it has been of late. We need more charging infrastructure around the city and more. And finally, I'll just say that while we fight to reduce emission of greenhouse gases, we have to deal with what's already here: rising waters, increasing storms, and all the climate effects that are already upon us. So we have to do things like invest in infrastructure to protect our subway system so it doesn't shut down just because we have some heavy rains. We have to have better ways to absorb storm runoff in parks, in street trees, et cetera. And we have to fortify our coastlines against rising waters, especially in lower Manhattan, where we saw in Superstorm Sandy, they're very vulnerable. So a lot to do here, and I'm excited about this discussion and really grateful to be part of it. So thank you so much, Congressmember.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much for your commitment. And let me just share with you some of the other accomplishments that we made here. We had a busy appropriations season. We approved $294 million for global bilateral adoption programs, an additional $268 million for global clean energy programs, $202 million for global sustainable landscape programs, $15 million for strengthening resilience to natural disasters in the Caribbean, and $3 million for Caribbean energy security initiatives, which focus on building energy sector resilience across the region. I'm also working with WEAC on the low-income housing renewable credit, which is an important credit that will assist solar energy and other programs. So I want to really now shift and introduce an important person who continues to play a pivotal role in environmental issues, working with WEAC. I want to introduce Lonnie Portis, who is the Environmental Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at WEAC for Environmental Justice. And let's hear from Lonnie. I'm sure Lonnie has a lot to teach us. We're here to learn, and you're out on the field, Lonnie. I know you're on the ground, burning all that energy associated with youth. Mark, look, he's a young person with committed to environmental justice, and we welcome him to present. So welcome, Lonnie. Let's hear from you.
Thank you so much, Congressmember, for having me. I really appreciate it. Sorry for the technical difficulty. My internet dropped at the wrong time. This is the world we live in, unfortunately, with all of the virtual things that we've been doing. But I do appreciate you having me on here to talk about this and highlighting the issue of climate justice and, more importantly, environmental justice, especially in the communities. And it's nice to see Councilmember Levine here as well. Both of you guys have been very pivotal and close allies with WeAct, and so we really do appreciate that. But yeah, so I wanted to just kind of share a little bit of some of WeAct's priorities coming up that we have, and ongoing priorities that we have currently. So we're an 800 plus member organization that fights for environmental justice, mostly in the Northern Manhattan community, but we have grown to fight for state legislation as well as federal legislation, and basically to impact, as Congressmember said, globally, the global fight. So just to kind of highlight some of the things that we have been working on, one of the initiatives that we have going on is around electric school buses. And we've been advocating for the transition from dirty diesel school buses to electric school buses to reduce the direct air pollution that harm our children within our communities. We've also been working around some extreme heat work, and particularly looking to reform and change the LIHEAP program, which is the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. So New York City is particularly susceptible to the rising temperatures because of the urban heat island effect. And so more funds are needed for the New York State Cooling Assistance program, and particularly we'd like those funds to go to utility bill assistance cooling programs. A lot of people do have options and ways for cooling, but when you turn on your AC, that's expensive and it costs money, and it's cost prohibitive for a lot of those families who are in low income households. We're also doing a lot of work around lead, and WeAct has been a leader in city and state level for decades on reducing lead exposure through preventative policies. We've also been doing a lot of federal advocacy lately on lead service lines and lead and copper rulings. And we've also been heavily invested in East Harlem. East Harlem is one of the lowest income communities within New York City. And we've developed a community vision and action plan that outlines specific recommendations to revitalize the 125th street corridor on the east side, and try to transform that into an environmentally and economically sustainable area. But we want to make sure we're mindful and want to preserve the El Barrio's history and culture. And those are some of the things that we're working on, among many other things around climate change and environmental justice.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you for your input. Mark, I know that you mentioned the impact of Tropical Storm Elsa and the impact that it had throughout the district. I know that some of the scenes that I witnessed in social media, in fact, one of them was on the subway station on 157th Street, the #1 train, but I also saw how businesses were flooded. Businesses that have really been struggling throughout the pandemic and are trying to open now are facing the flooding from us, that storm, and we're working to see how we get FEMA to give them some help. We have at least close to 30 businesses that were directly impacted. But tell us both, Lonnie and Mark, from the local level, what's your perspective on that, and how? I know that you're working on with East Harlem, and East Harlem also got terribly flooded by Superstorm Sandy. What are some of the things that you guys are looking to see done to prevent that from occurring in the future?
You know, Washington Heights is far above sea level. We're a few hundred feet above sea level, but we're still vulnerable. So I think that was a wake-up call. And it also is alarming to see we have a mass transit system that can be shut down because we had heavy rain. Now, yes, that was a period of very heavy rain. Some people said it was like getting a month's worth of rain in a couple of hours, but that's no longer going to be a once in a lifetime event, and we have to prepare for it. And it does reflect underinvestment in the subway system. We need sewers which can handle more water. We need them to be better maintained so they don't clog up. And we need something that I mentioned earlier, which is a better way to absorb storm runoff. And so you can have something under a street tree they call it a bioswale, that could collect hundreds of gallons of water so it doesn't end up flooding the street like that. We can have playgrounds that the blacktop is permeable, so again, you can absorb water. Green roofs also, which can cool the neighborhood, be a source of fresh vegetables, but also, again, can absorb water. So we've got to make all these investments. And in part for the reason that you said, Congressmember, it's the little guys who are vulnerable. It is small businesses, it's people in low-income communities who are getting hit hard and don't have the resources always to bounce back the way in the case of businesses a national chain would. So thank you for fighting to get federal assistance for those small businesses. But I'm afraid this is just a preview of what's ahead for us. And we've got to do much, much more to be ready for the violent storms, the more unpredictable weather, the hotter temperatures, and more that's coming unless we take action now.
Yeah, so definitely WEACT is a really strong supporter and resiliency as well. As we've talked about already, East Harlem is one of kind of the lower income neighborhoods and have historically been left out of kind of flood remediation and resiliency programs, and more money is needed for investments for infrastructure that allows us to kind of keep that flooding at bay. And so, we've been very appreciative of the fight that both of you guys have done to kind of mitigate those by getting federal funding. A lot of it is money thing. It's about resources and putting in the resources into spaces that have that are affected the most, but they also get the least resources when it comes to that. So we're definitely finding and championing, especially for East Harlem, to kind of get the help that it needs financially to kind of do this work.
And of course, a lot of these changes require capital dollars, and we're fighting to ensure that as much money as possible is included in the transportation infrastructure bill, and that that we build smart and resilient and green, and that we do it the right way so that we don't have to go back to this, right? We have this great opportunity to do a major transportation infrastructure bill across the country. Let's do it the right way. And so this is so important for neighborhoods like East Harlem, and so important for neighborhoods throughout the district that I represent. And Lonnie, I know that you have been working on 125th Street and East Harlem, and the bus fleet. Why don't you share with us some of the details of what WEAC is conducting and doing there to ensure that we address environmental disparities in that community?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely done a lot of community-based work in East Harlem, kind of starting with not only the North Manhattan Climate Action Plan, but we've also developed a plan with community members in East Harlem using the Community Visioning Action Plan to kind of really lay out a community-based approach to climate and climate change and resiliency. And so we've kind of recently just restarted with those efforts and gotten some funds to really go forward with this, and going to be definitely meeting with a lot of different people, stakeholders, to kind of make this vision and this plan go forward. And if anyone's actually interested in seeing that plan, it's actually on our website at www.react.org if you want to see that in more detail, especially if you live in the area. You know, one of the biggest issues that we've been dealing with lately is heat, right? Is there's such a huge heat sink in that area, and tree planting and infrastructure that is green and green roofs, it kind of will go towards making sure that we can mitigate that heat urban island effect.
I know that, Lonnie, that WEAC has been an advocate of a climate corp, for the nation and for young people and folks in general to work in. Could you share with the public some of the details of that particular initiative?
So we've been kind of advocating for, I think sometimes the name has changed multiple times when it comes to the Climate Corps initiative, but basically getting younger people, and especially in communities of color and socioeconomically disadvantaged communities, to be a part of this kind of Climate Corps to gained skills and building things like solar panels and identifying issues within their neighborhoods and their communities, and so that they can actively be a part of this, basically this new green job initiative and work that we're going to be doing going forward. I think it's been a kind of a national, if not especially city level kind of idea of building back in a green way. And I think it's really important to make sure that those people who have those jobs and who are trained in those are people who have been, again, historically left out of that conversation and of those opportunities.
Thank you, Lonnie. Let me just also inform our public that's tuning into this important conversation that recently I joined Congresswoman Cori Bush and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in a letter sent to leadership, basically expressing our concerns that the legislation going through Congress will not necessarily address on how to reduce the greenhouse emissions that are driving really the climate crisis to a level that we are comfortable with, and that we're urging for really the Green New Deal's levels. And so the letter calls for an increased funding of $250 billion in climate and environmental justice funding for local government, $1 trillion investment to build public renewable sites with labor jobs, $600 billion in investment in upgrading public housing and public schools, and of course, Senator Schumer and myself and Congresswoman Velasquez have been calling for an $80 billion allocation for nature. And of course, we would like to see how that's also built greener, more sustainable, with open space and something that we could be proud of, and we will have to be able to necessarily be forced to go back to it because it was built the wrong way. I want to finalize our conversation, Mark, with your views of the future of the environmental justice fight and the environmental movement. And what do you see on the horizon for the movement in Manhattan? Let's talk about the borough, because I know you have a very clear vision for the borough. What are the needs for Manhattan as a borough in terms of the waterfront, in terms of what you deem necessary for Manhattan to do to protect all its families?
Well, sometimes we forget that Manhattan is an island, a fairly small island that's exposed to the ocean. And that means we have to do much more to create resiliency in the face of what we know are more storms coming amidst rising seas. Lower Manhattan is still extremely vulnerable. Almost 10 years after Hurricane Sandy, we've made very little progress to date in protecting Lower Manhattan. Again, there was an environmental justice impact there. In Sandy, it was large public housing developments around the Lower East Side that got flooded and were out without power for days on end. But it's all the way around to Battery Park City and beyond. It's still extremely exposed. But what we saw in Washington Heights in the recent storm is that there's no part of the island that can be considered immune from climate change. And we've got to invest in the infrastructure throughout the island so that heavy rain doesn't shut this place down. And it is difficult work. It requires upgrading sewer systems. It requires installing more permeable surfaces, activating green roofs, and more. And then I'll just close on the work we have to do to emit fewer greenhouse gases in this borough by pushing even harder to go to renewable forms of energy and to break our addiction to the internal combustion automobile engine, which is the single largest source of greenhouse gases globally throughout the last century. And that's going to require policies like congestion pricing, so we have better buses and subways, and making it easier and safer and more attractive to walk, to use a bicycle, to ride a bus. All of this is connected. It's all about the climate. And these are challenges which I'm looking forward to fighting for together with you, Congressmember, to allies like We Act, and everyone here at the state, city, and local level.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Council Member Mark Levine.
Don't get me into trouble, Congressmember.
Yeah, okay, no, we're gonna keep you in the borough.
Okay.
Of course, Lonnie Portis, who's doing a terrific job with WEAC, and Peggy Shepard. A shout out to Peggy Shepard from WEAC. We love Peggy Shepard and the national voice that she has become for environmental issues that brings forward to here to Washington the environmental, local, urban environmental justice movement in a very precise and definite way. So thank you all for participating in this important discussion. And I look forward to continuing the work on behalf of all the communities that I represent in the 13th Congressional District. Thank you so much and keep the faith.